Hi there, welcome back to the podcast of Wednesday's Child. Again, it's been a while. You've had a little bit of a relief and reprieve from Sarah and I chatting to you. But I know you've missed us, and I know that because our mailbag has been really full this last couple of weeks. And I'm delighted because that means we're doing something for the community. You clearly value us as a contribution and you look forward to when we share our insights over the airwaves. And that kind of brings us on to where we are with this episode today, because we had a lovely message in from somebody who is a parent and in recovery and specifically said, could we talk about that as a topic on the podcast? So that's what we're going to get on to discussing. But before we do so, I'm going to welcome back my co host. Hi, Sarah. How are you?
Hello, I'm good, thank you. I've just moved into another room in head office. I'm in my work's head office today because everyone else is working from home. And I love coming in on days like this because you get all the space, someone else's heat and electricity, and none of the chat.
Oh, amazing. But no water cooler moment, no opportunity to talk
Yeah,
about
well,
what was on TV last night.
and we all love the chat, don't we? But sometimes when you just need to get your head down, it's quite nice to come in when the place is silent.
Oh, I'm so with you. And as you know, like my world is comms, so I'm kind of often writing really long articles, and I'm terrible. So I get invited to go and sit in client offices sometimes and have my kind of sessions with them, brainstorming ideas. And when they then want me to sit at a desk and do lots of writing, I find it so difficult when
Yeah.
people aren't kind of used to the fact that you need this silent space to be able to form your words and write, several thousand words in one go. I can't do it. I can't do inane chatter and concentrate.
I know, and you find yourself you don't want to be rude, do you? You don't want to stop someone talking, or you don't want to cut someone off. And I do love post-pandemic. I come in the office loads more than I thought because I've got total flexibility. I know lots of our listeners have often talked to us about work and flexibility and returning to work and all of that. And when I shifted my career, halfway through recovery, having that flexibility was really important to me. That was one of the things I was looking at. And then I get it, I got it, I use it. But post pandemic, I find myself like, no, no, give me people. Give me people, give me people. So
People. I need
yeah,
people.
I need people. So yeah, it's
I
quite
think it
funny.
benefits you on all sides of your life as well, because one of the things I think it adds to your sort of social contribution is something else to talk about. So if you live with a partner, for example, the fact that you go out of the home, or it might be parents, but you go out of the home and you talk to other people. And I'm not saying you necessarily go home and you gossip about them around the dinner table, but it just gives you something else to talk about, doesn't it? It's a different dynamic.
Of course it does. Of course it does. And that's again linking back to Wednesday's Child. That's like so essential when you're in recovery for that slightly different perspective and or a break away from the walls that might have trapped you beforehand, or watching and seeing and hearing how folks without the illness navigate their day when they've left their packed lunch at home, or
Yeah.
someone runs in the office because I'm going to Greg, should I grab anyone a donut or whatever. Like just observing that kind of behavior when you're in recovery, I found really
Yeah.
helpful.
I think you're so right. And actually, it also reminds me of that kind of the need to remind yourself that our illness can make us very selfish. We can think that, woe is me, I'm living with this awful thing, or I'm trying to recover from this torturous illness. And we forget what it feels like to be that other colleague who might have an aging parent, a child with colic, or battles with that child's school, or fallen out with their spouse. And sometimes we just need to put our head above, like, kind of above the thick cloud and fog that we're feeling ourselves, and just be reminded everybody has day-to-day problems. And I'm not saying for 1 minute that diminishes how difficult it is to navigate an eating disorder, but just sometimes we just need to be reminded about the universe around us, and every now and then just feel grateful too. And there is gratitude to be found in all these small things. I was listening to a guy do an interview only yesterday actually, and it was I found myself, when you sometimes you're listening to something and you literally stand still
Mm.
because it just catches you. And he'd lost his wife and his daughter, and the presenter, I forget how the presenter phrased the question about how you keep going or something. And he said, I'm so grateful. I remind myself I have two adorable children that I have had through my beautiful wife. And I had some wonderful family times, and I've got some great times to come. I'm grateful for every day. I'm grateful for the chance to continue to be a father. And I must use that gratitude to live my best life now. And I found that really, like, and that was kind of in quite raw aftermath of losing someone he loved. And I think we all have a duty to do that to some degree, don't we? Just to remind ourselves.
I'm incredibly grateful for work for the learning opportunity it gave me in my recovery. You know, we have these like team buffets. People have them often, like working lunches, I suppose. Um, we have these team buffets, and I remember when I'd returned to work to this new job, quite early on, I was very conscious that I wasn't partaking in the buffet and or I was partaking in very, very small, minor kind of amounts. But almost, but then telling myself actually in my, the way the way I thought about my recovery, like use that as the challenge itself, watching people, how have those four other women in the table loaded up their plate, right? Okay, so that's reminding yourself that social eating
What's
thing, that's
normal?
what I do. That's you can go back for seconds of actually they've just gone back for thirds. Wow, brilliant. Okay, so that's fine. And then like really using all those social opportunities as a way of learning what being living without the illness would end up looking like.
And actually, I think you make some really good points there, which I'm sure we'll touch on in this wider topic. But actually, it's one of the dangers of living with family when you're recovering, particularly if those family around you tiptoe around you. So they're afraid to put trays of food around you because, oh, that might make Sarah really scared and she might
Yeah.
not want to come back for seconds. And actually, they prevent you from seeing what normal looks like. And I can remember that for a number of years of going around friends and family and on kind of Christmas season and realizing nobody's putting tins of chocolates out. Nobody's putting cheese straws out. What happened there? What was that? And of course, it was, oh, previous conversations. Don't do that because Debbie's coming around and she's recovering from anorexia and food will be a real issue. But actually, it speaks to your feeling that this is weird, this is wrong, and also it doesn't help me understand what normal looks like.
Yeah, we were having a reflection the other day, and I can laugh now. The first time, because obviously I travel a lot for work, and the first time I traveled for work, it was actually a big team meeting in London at the O2. No, we didn't fill the O2. I don't work for
Oh,
some like mega
check
company.
you.
No, it was like a little side. There's a massive conference going on. We were in a side room, and they didn't know anything about my illness at that point because I decided at that point to keep it quiet. And actually, I think that this event I'm about to describe made me talk about it. So we were all sat around, and someone in the meeting, just because I was brand new to the company then, they said it was getting, the meeting was going on, and she just threw me some money and said, "Oh, Sarah, do us a favor, go and fly down to Subway and buy everyone sandwiches." And I remember at the time going, "What?" and we laughed about it the other week, so we did a big reflective piece, and I was like, "Yeah, you sent the anorexic to go and get the company sandwiches. That was the best thing you possibly could have done in that moment." And it was like, but when you look back, that's what being in a work environment is. That's normal, to just quickly go and fly down to Subway and grab a load of sandwiches for
And
people without
actually,
batting
better
your
for
eyes
your
out.
recovery that you were forced to, well, not forced, but you were encouraged to go and do something like that rather than the tiptoe
Exactly.
around you boss who already knew about your anorexia and thought, oh, looking around this table, who can I send out to get sandwiches? Better not send the woman with anorexia.
Yeah, 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 exactly, exactly.
Okay, so
Mhm.
let's move on to the topic in hand. The topic in hand, as I said, is about parenting, but parenting when you are the person in recovery. So you may have had children for some time prior to then experiencing an eating disorder, and now you're wading through your recovery while also raising a child, or perhaps you've encountered an eating disorder for the first time when falling pregnant or entering in parenthood for the first time. And I guess, this message came into us as someone really sort of kind of struggling with how to approach her recovery, how to be aware of how it might impact her children, and just wanting to be a good mum, but also do what's right for herself in recovery. And naturally, Sarah, I'm kind of leading so much of this at your door because the distinction between the two of us is you have a child, I don't. And also, obviously, I experienced my eating disorder much early on. You already by that time you were a mother, so
Yeah,
this kind of is really pertinent to you. So
yeah.
I shared that message with you, and I'm sure you looked at that and thought, yep, there was a time when I could really relate to that sense of fear and the desire to do the right thing. What hit home for you?
I think it's really important, first and foremost, for like all honesty, is that this topic kind of came up, didn't it, about a year or so ago, and I wasn't in the state to talk about it. Um, so I apologize to the person that asked back then. Um, but
Well,
but
I
but
think to
in
be fair,
every
just reflecting on that, I think you say you weren't in the right state. I think it was about being really authentic and saying,
yeah,
I'm in a good place myself, but how do I narrate this and give something that's really pertinent and relevant for that person who's going to cling on to every word of what I say. So I think from that perspective, it's been really helpful.
Yeah, yeah. So I suppose where should we start? Where in terms of like support for people who have an eating disorder and have children, I think the first place I would start is don't let it question your abilities to be a parent. And I think that's the first thing that, on reflection, when I've been kind of thinking about what we were going to talk about, at no point in any of my history in services or in day services was my ability to parent questioned. It wasn't even like there was no hint that there was an understanding or thought that I might not be able to be parenting properly. Obviously, there was no evidence of trauma in Amy. There was no evidence of anything that was actually untoward in my parenting. So you can parent and be poorly is what I think I'm kind of trying to say. And it's important that we don't cast a judgment that just because you're poorly. I think what I would spin on that is I was parenting other people, but I wasn't parenting myself, which is actually a really quite important distinction. But anyway, that's just a small thing there. So don't doubt your abilities to be a parent. But we do have to be honest and open and realistic to the fact that this illness it can be hidden. We do hide things, but also it is out there. There are things that go on that other people will notice. And obviously, as our children get older, what they notice becomes more readily available, I suppose. So just for context for everybody, I went into hospital when Amy was 8. That was how old she was when I actually, for my first admission. I'd probably, though, been what I would class as ill at least since she was 4, if not slightly earlier on.
Okay.
So a big chunk. So I want to put a positive spin on all of this though, because this is not about just us sort of wallowing in the bad bits, because there are bad bits, there are negative bits, but there is a way that I kind of learned and carved out that I almost could use the fact that I was a parent to really help my recovery. And there's some of the things that I explicitly did that I think might be helpful for people to listen to. That something that came about quite early on when I started what I class my real recovery, which was 2019, was when Dr. Katie turned and flicked a switch in my head about how recovery had to be about me. So I do think up until that point, the rhetoric in my own head was like, well, I've got to get well for my daughter, I've got to get well for my husband, I've got to get well for my parents. It wasn't until I actually accepted the duty to myself and the obligation to myself and the fact that I was worthy of recovery and I needed recovery and I could have a life after recovery, and recovery did not have to define and make it my identity. It wasn't until I did that piece of work and that understanding that actually my real recovery began. Now that there's a lot of shame around that though, because then it's like, well, why couldn't you get well for your daughter? And people have said that to me. Why didn't you get well for Amy? And it's because that disconnect, getting well for someone else, was not me getting well. That was doing something in order to function in a manner. It wasn't about me getting well. And as you know, Debbie, I was absolutely determined that I would get well, fully recovered. So that was really important, doing that piece of work to make it so that my recovery was about me.
And that would be true even if we weren't just talking about a child, wouldn't it? There's no point in saying, I've got to get well for my partner, my husband, the boyfriend that says he'll stick by me if I get well, or the parents that I really love, so I want to get well for them. It has to be a selfish desire to recover for oneself, because part of that recovery is recognizing, as you well say, that you are worthy of recovery. You desire and you desire that future, and you are worthy of that future, and you need to find the love for yourself enough to make that possible.
Yeah. Then also it's really important to reflect that actually I was bringing up a girl, and this illness affects girls, especially from a teenage age, the most than it does any other demographic. But actually, me banishing bullshit food, me banishing never speaking about a diet, me banishing female magazines, me banishing exercise routines and regimes from the house did Amy a world of good.
Now, I'm fortunate enough that I've been in your household. I've been around you and your daughter. I've been around meal times with your daughter. I've also seen what fabulous baker your daughter is. Oh my God. Honestly, if you walked into your house, you would think that girl has been kind of professionally baking for years. It's just phenomenal. It seems from the outside as if, whether it's because of or in spite of what you've been through, she has a very healthy relationship with food, her weight and exercise, and just generally kind of her acceptance of what eating is there for.
We've had really frank conversations as a whole family. Like when I'm saying whole family, I'm talking about my triangle, my husband, me, and Amy. Really open and frank conversations about the language that we'll use around food and what we will and won't let in the house. And we have complete and utter free access to everything. Now, I have friends that, put locks on snack cupboards and have very strict routines and times when their children are and aren't allowed to have snacks. And that's fine. That's what they're doing as a family. But we decided because of my recovery that we would take all limitations of food. Amy never once has gone crazy and eaten 17 Easter eggs in a night. Far from it. She self-regulates very, very well. And I think a lot of that self-regulation, to be honest, is because at an early age she learned there was going to be no scarcity. There was going to be no bad, right and wrong food. There was going to be no you can and can't or times of day or anything like that. And I needed the family to do that because I'd put myself in that world for such a long time. So that was where recovery really definitely helped
So does
Amy.
that have to be a contract within the home, but beyond the home as well? So do grandparents have to be part of that? Do, kind of wider parts of the family that will come in and out of the home on a regular basis? Is that vital?
I would call people up if they came into my home. I don't think I would have ever dared question people in someone else's home. So if someone came into my home and says, "Oh, I don't eat, I'm not eating mayonnaise. I'd be on a diet. I'm on a diet," I would say, I'm not meaning to be hurtful here, but we don't use that kind of language. It's fine if you don't want it, but can we just not have that conversation? But in someone else's home, I was never brave enough to have those out conversations. I'm always really respectful for people that can. I think in terms of the questions in the mailbag are often about how you deal with it day to day. And I think that's a very different perspective than what I was kind of talking to there. One of the things that I actually learned in recovery is meal plans and what you'll feed a 10-year-old are actually really quite similar. So I literally copied what I was feeding Amy. So she would get up on a Monday, school day, whatever. She might have a bowl of Frosties and a slice of toast. Oh, it's Amy, I'm going to have a bowl of Frosties and a slice of toast as well. She didn't know what I was doing, and I would never have had that conversation with her. But I literally copied for like. She'd come home from school, Amy, and I would say, "What should we have for tea?" And she'd say, "I don't know, battered fish and chips or whatever, or spaghetti bolognese," and I'd be like, "Okay, right, let's do that." And it would kind of I without letting her know, was using her as kind of like my food role model for a good chunk of that initial recovery, just to get me over some hurdles. A question that came up in the mailbag was about being out and about and social situations with children, and that is a tricky one. I totally get that. That is a real tricky one because every bone in your mum body or your dad body wants to be able to take them to the park and have a picnic or just pop by we've just had the drive through Greg's open, when you drive past a drive through Greg's and your kids go, "Mum, Greg's," you want to be able to go and both enjoy a sausage roll or whatever. That is tricky. And again, that's about that question that you often say, Debbie, about, are you actually in recovery? So if you're in recovery, then again, you would use every opportunity thrown your way as a way of being actively engaged in recovery. So and that piece that we've spoken about a lot, that kind of just say yes piece. So I suppose if you're finding yourself say no to your children all the time, "No, we can't go to Starbucks. No, we can't have a picnic. No, we can't do this. Or you can do it, but mom's not going to join in." Then at some point, if you actively are in recovery, you're going to have to find the strength to say just yes, to just say yes. And if you're struggling to do that, then it might be that's when you need a little bit more therapeutic support or occupational therapy support to help you be able to just say yes. Because as the older they get, they do start to notice.
Yeah. And I think that's one observation, isn't it? Is that important thing of remembering that just because they're a child doesn't mean they're not perceptive and taking everything in. They are watching everything you do and everything you say, far younger than you might think. So whether your child is 4 or 14, there is an impact by the way you are behaving. And that's not to say it's easy for somebody in recovery to forget the impact and influence that they are having on someone else. I'm not saying it's easy to park it, but I am saying it's kind of worth being mindful that
Mm.
that younger person is very aware of it.
I distinctly remember, I used to have a big thing over worth, like my self-worth and food, and the fact that I didn't, for whatever reason, and I've never dug down to it, and now I kind of like don't want to, but I would actively say out loud, oh no, I'm not allowed that, or I can't have that, or that's not for me. And I distinctly remember Amy saying to me, but why, mum? Like, remember we were in the caravan. We used to have a caravan at the time. We were in the caravan, and it was a breakfast, and there was like a big pastry breakfast spread, and I was sat eating this titchy tiny bowl of muesli. And I remember she was like, "Mum, coming up," and I was like, "No, Amy, I can't." And I remember saying I can't, and she was like, "But why?" And I couldn't answer her because I actually didn't know why, but there was
But
something
you know
in.
that comes back to that question that I've raised on our podcast before and in our socials, that is that true? Is this true? Asking yourself in that moment when you're about to say the thing that no one wants to hear of, no, mummy can't, mummy mustn't, mummy isn't allowed, and just saying to yourself, hold on a second, Sarah, is this true? Is that true? Why is this true?
Yeah,
And if you can defeat that argument, it helps you to propel forward and
yeah.
move forward.
And I think what you've just said there a second ago, I've just been thinking about it as you said it, about how our children do see us. And I then said at the beginning of this podcast, didn't I, that I got well for myself, which I did, and that was a massive shift. But you do have to acknowledge as a parent, and this is where the guilt and the shame can sit if you don't have the tools to deal with it. You do have to acknowledge that they do see it. And at some point, you do have to make a choice as to whether they're going to continue to see it or not. And that can be a real motivation for recovery, as long as you've got yourself at the center of it. It can be a real motivation. You always say, don't you, I'm sick and tired. I'm,
Of being sick and
I'm
tired.
being sick and tired. Thank you. So I'm sick and tired of my son seeing me running on the spot, doing 50 jumping jacks before lunch or whatever. And then it's about the decision that you make in the moment for recovery and for yourself that would then impact on your kids.
Mm. Where do you think you are today in terms of where that story sits with your daughter and the history of your eating disorder? Do you think there's ever a need to discuss it again, bearing in mind she's now teenage years? Or do you feel quite comfortable that that story just sits alongside you and it's not a box that needs to keep being opened?
Um, I think now where we are, I'm comfortable with it to be sat beside us, but I will never shy away from having the conversation and opening it again. And I will go by Amy's lead on that one. I'm not going to keep bringing it up because it's important. I think that once you get to a certain stage of your recovery, that it's about the fact that what life is now like after the illness.
Yeah.
Um, but at any point Amy was to mention anything or say anything, I would have that open conversation. And I'd be, now that she's older, now she's 14, I'd be asking her those, like, personally, not where's this come from, why suddenly now, what's happening in your world at the moment, Amy, that I might not be aware of that's brought this back up again. And are you concerned about yourself? Are you concerned about others? Because as well, our children, because they've seen it and they've gone through a process, they will see it in others. Amy a couple of times has come home from school and said, Mum, I'm worried about X person. What do I do? Because she recognizes traits, she recognizes behaviors. I think, though, it's also really important, again, because we're all about honesty in Wednesday's Child, is Amy has had therapy. So, and that was, fortunately, she goes to a wonderful school, and that was through school. So school were aware of my illness, and I approached them and said, is there any chance that you offer any like free counselling support, because Amy has had, and I did phrase it, a significant family trauma. And the school with open arms, and she had an 8-week course, and I never asked what was discussed on that course, because obviously if there's anything, alarm bells ringing, then their duty of care is they have to tell you. So I never asked Amy about it. I never asked school about it. I just waited in case anything got back. And I must admit that she suddenly became more chatty about things, and it seemed it clearly has had a huge positive impact on her. So it would be wrong of me to sit here and say, oh, there was no impact on Amy at all, because there was, and she had to have support because of that. I even reached out to one of our counsellors one point, Debbie. I remember asking your permission if I could speak to Sarah, I think, at one point, just because it was around that time I was thinking, is there something going on here with Amy? And I just wanted to check in with a professional, that if there was anything, maybe I was overreaching things. But yeah, we would talk about it now, but I won't actively start the conversation. I'll go on Amy's lead with that one. But you're on high alert, aren't you? As a parent, you're always on high alert, but with this illness, you're on hyper high alert. So to be honest, Debbie, I actually think it's my husband who's on more hyper high alert with Amy than I am, and that's the journey he's been on,
Right.
probably. Hale, she's not eating much breakfast. That was this morning, actually. She's not eating. I've noticed these past couple of days she's not eating much breakfast. And I was like, yeah, because her morning break's been moved forward at school. So she's probably just, she can get another snack at 10 o'clock or whatever, which I know she does, because I check her phone thingy that says what money she's spending on a school dinner. So it's like, it's that kind of, but I think he's probably more hyper alert than I am, to be honest.
As you say, it's an illness that's going to mean that you are in that situation. If you've ever been up close and personal with something like an eating disorder, it's not going to go away overnight. You're going to be aware of it, whether you're the person that's directly experienced it or you've been kind of on the periphery of it. So I think that stands to reason. Well, that's incredible insight on a personal level, Sarah, and I'm really grateful to you for that, because I know kind of I sit one step removed from that, and I really hope that the person that mailed into our mailbag, I really hope that's been useful. We really do, I'm going to say enjoy, but we value the opportunity to be able to respond directly to what it is you're concerned about or what's going on in your lives, and it gives us the opportunity to reflect experiences and incidences that are going on for people in the eating disorder community. So whether you are somebody who's themselves in recovery, or you are a carer, parent, partner, teacher even, then please feel free to drop those questions in, because those are the ones that it's helpful to us as well, isn't it? It kind of, it helps us kind of question, oh yeah, how do we feel about this today compared with, when we were in the thick of it, perhaps. So it's quite helpful for us to kind of have another reason to reflect on our own journey and what would have helped us or did help us. So
And
thank you for listening.
always expect that recovery spin, though, from us.
Yeah,
It's never going to be a
absolutely.
pity
And
party here.
it is, and we say this, don't we, all the time, that this isn't about kind of, oh, woe is me, poor me. It's about what can we discuss on this, on this medium to help people with practical solutions. You and I talk all the time about the toolkit, don't we? We want people to feel what's in my toolkit today, whether it's being able to journal, whether it's kind of introducing Wednesday's Child to your tribe, whether it's having a befriender, whether it's having a social group that you get involved in. And as I've used the phrase so often before, it's not what's the matter with you, but what matters to you. So what do you aspire toward? What do you hope to be involved in? What do you want to move on to do? So all those things are really, really important. So thank you again for listening to this episode of Wednesday's Child. We'll look forward to hearing from you with your next suggestions for topics when we come back again really soon, and we will share them with you on this Wednesday's Child podcast channel very, very soon. Take care for now. Stay focused on recovery.